Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. We are just about to get started. My name is Karthik, and I would like to welcome you to the Shift Left Accessibility, Design, Code, and Test Mobile Apps webinar. And before we get started, I would quickly like to start with a round of introductions. And next slide, please. Great. So my name is Karthik. I'm a part of the accessibility team here at BrowserStack. Joining me is Parampreet Singh. He leads the accessibility initiatives for Guardian Life. I won't take too much time. I'll let him introduce himself and then we'll quickly get started with a few housekeeping items.
Thank you so much for having me, Karthik. Hi, everyone. This is Parampreet Singh. And I truly feel blessed to having found my purpose of making the digital world more inclusive. And over the last decade or so, I have gone from writing accessibility code to shaping the VCAG policies, governance frameworks, and leading the largest organizations, helping them make a positive impact on end users. And as Karthik mentioned, am the lead user experience for Guardian. And in my current role, I work closely with product owners, designers, developers, and testers to embed accessibility into your SDLC. Because I believe inclusion is not a checklist, but it's a culture.
Absolutely. Thank you for that intro, Param. You're obviously an expert, and we are really glad to have you here. We'd like to get started, but just a few housekeeping items from our side. Today's session is going to be about 60 minutes long. The session is being recorded. All the participants will be muted to enable the speakers engage without any disruptions. There is a dedicated question and answer round scheduled at the end of our discussion, and the recording will be made available to all the attendees as a follow-up email. Now, I'm excited to be talking to you, Param, today. You're obviously an expert in the field. You've wore multiple hats over the time, but in our conversation over the past few months, I've also noticed that you're quite methodical and an empathetic person to engage and work with. I'll quickly lay out the agenda so that everyone joining is on the same page. We've just wrapped up our introductions, and then we are going to dive into a fireside conversation between Param and I where we cover the design aspects, mobile accessibility testing, and how should organizations approach accessibility testing in general. We will pick Param's brain and his more than a decade-long experience being an accessibility expert himself and get some insights that you guys can also take away and then extrapolate and implement within your organizations. Once that discussion is done, we will spend a little bit of time talking about BrowserStack's accessibility testing suite, how it can help you scale accessibility testing, and how it also incorporates AI powered issue detection, contextual detection, and remediation guidance. Once that is done, we will be pausing in between to take your questions and give those answers given the time permits. And once that is done, there are some exciting gifts also for you at the end of the chat. But without further ado, I'd like to start the conversation and today's fireside chat with Param. And in the next few minutes, like I mentioned, we'll explore what shift-left accessibility truly means instead of a word or a jargon that gets thrown around, and why mobile accessibility matters now more than ever, how automation and real device testing are transforming how teams scale accessibility testing globally. So, Param, my first question for you, you're obviously an expert. You've spent more than a decade in this space. You've helped shape policies, and you bring quite a bit of nuance into this discussion. So, my first question for you would be, you often say that accessibility isn't just a checklist, but it's more of a culture. And oftentimes that requires a mindset shift. But what does that look like in practice, especially in organizations, enterprises of that scale, like Garden that you're a part of, and for others too?
Absolutely, Karthik. Before I touch upon or answer your question, I'm I'm truly happy to see the results that we got from the poll. So 65% said they took it at the initial design phase when they are doing designs in Figma. And that's the true reflection of how you can make it as a culture and not a checklist. We all know what a checklist is, right? If you go by the literal meaning of a checklist and if you divide it, check means to verify. List means a track of items. When it comes to accessibility, checklist only helps you find defects or bugs that you call, but a culture helps them provide them or uh, find them early in the cycle, right? Which means you are helping them prevent them happen in the first place. Okay. Now, embedding accessibility into the processes starts way earlier in the cycle. As the poll results mentioned, 65% said yes to it. That's where you have to build inclusion as part of your DNA. It should not be something, a last minute fix or last minute testing that you perform. And there are ways that you can build a culture in your organization, Karthik. You always begin with defining your why it really matters to have an inclusive experience. Is it purely you want to adhere to the compliancy or avoid lawsuits? Don't get me wrong, that's not a bad reason to begin with. But the real pull happens when you understand the empathy, when you have the empathy for people with disabilities. You understand the impact of your work in the real lives, right? So it's all about the human impact that we are looking at. Is your work reducing the digital divide? Is it empowering users to buy products online without depending upon anybody else? So it's that purpose that creates a pull. Also, having the digital accessibility labs, what we have seen in my experience, Karthik, if you provide an experience lab wherein your developers, your designers, or anyone on your team can experience the assistive technologies used by people with disabilities, giving them the first-hand experience, help them create or generate that empathy. Now, once you have defined your why, comes in your executive buy-in and defining your governance in place. At the end of the day, for senior leadership or executives, numbers matter, right? When you
Correct.
provide the numbers, what is the ROI on the investment and accessibility? What are the untapped markets that you can enter or scale or increase your market share when you build for people with disabilities? You will get that buy-in. And once you have that buy-in, Karthik, you will go into setting up the governances, shaping your VCAG policies. Which standard do you follow? What are the roles and responsibilities of each individual on the team? What is your statement for working with external vendors? Are you working with fully compliant vendors or are you working with vendors who are offering solutions at a cheaper price? Because trust me, it's gonna hurt you down the line. Once
Absolutely.
those are defined, Karthik, I know it's going to be a long answer, so please bear with me. Once you have policies in place, Karthik, then it comes the time, that's the right time to upskill your team. Have mandatory role-based trainings for your product owners, designers, developers, and testers. Accessibility is a niche, Karthik, as you are aware, and most of our participants on the call should be aware of it. It's not like regular development or regular testing that you do. You require specialized skill for it. And for that, you have to have mandatory trainings. I would say mandatory once in a year because technology is changing, your ARIA, everything is changing. Accessibility standards are also evolving, right? So
Exactly.
that's
Correct.
where I would start with upskilling.
Understood. And
The
I
other
think,
point, yeah,
no, no, please go ahead.
the other point that I would put on emphasis is doing a shift left into your SDLC. That's where I started, right? 65% said in the design phase that they consider accessibility, and that's the great mindset to have. I will take one step further. You start with your planning phase, wherein you are working with your product owners, writing features, providing ample time into your user stories, defining what is definition of done, putting VCAG requirements into it, and then passing on the baton to your designers to design with accessibility in mind, developers to use the right tools, look at the definition of done, and then passing the baton to your testing team members. So this is how you can build a culture. Now, you can safeguard it by having guardrails around it. You can validate whether the processes have been followed correctly or not. You can do external audits to evaluate your results. And then you can end it by having usability studies. I have seen reports, Karthik, having 100% conformance score, and then it is failing usability studies when it is being tested by real people with disabilities. So combining all these would lead to building a culture of inclusion.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that, Param. I know this is exactly the kind of stuff and knowledge, in fact, that our audience is expecting from today's discussion. And obviously, there's a lot to unpack there. So I heard you talk about starting with your why. What exactly is the reason you're doing it? Obviously, being empathetic, towards especially able users is one thing, but then there's also the compliance angle that needs to be factored in. Then you talked about how you can build an ROI based business case for leadership internally. And we hear these statistics thrown around quite a lot that 25% of all adults in the US have some form of disability that is not outwardly visible. 20% of the tech workforce is neurodivergent, and the list goes on. So there's definitely a market that is to be tapped there, and there's a dollar value that you can assign. And the third thing that you talked about was tooling and training, making sure that you have the right tooling in place, not something that's, again, just a check mark, but a tool that in itself is accessible, or at least conforms to certain standards, and then trainings that can also be incorporated at least once a year. Because like you rightly mentioned, accessibility in itself is a skill set. And I think you took shift left to a step even further, and taking it right at the planning stage and making sure that that mindset is created, and even the designers are aligned even before the first wireframe ever comes into picture. And lastly, which again is the most important thing, that we can conform to any guideline out there. These things can evolve so quickly, but if the validation is not done by what we term as usability testing, if the validation is not done by someone who has access needs, then all our efforts might as well be in vain. Because
Absolutely.
adhering to a conformance, getting to an accessibility guideline is one thing, but making sure that that end user who has access needs is able to use it is another. I think that's quite insightful, Param, and that brings me to the next question. We're seeing a lot of traction in the market, especially because of the European Accessibility Act come in, and there's also another ADA April 2026 deadline that is almost on the horizon for a lot of our clients. And with regulations like these, like the EAA, ADA, Section 508, what must businesses do differently, than what they might have done in the past to be truly accessible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to put things in context, all things that you mentioned, Karthik, follow different standards. To begin with, we have EA, European Accessibility Act, that follows EN 301549, and that is based on BCAG 2.2 and the ICT requirements. Then you have ADA, which is only applicable in the states. Department of Justice, Karthik, uses VCAG 2.1 AA, and that was in their April 2024 report, or maybe this year. And then you have Section 508, which is US federal, which actually depends upon VCAG 2.0 rather than 2.1. Now, all these are different laws governing based upon the location that where you sell your product or service, and they adhere to different standards. But the smartest move to do is to adhere to the latest standard, which is VCAG 2.2, which came out in October 2023. It's almost 2 years now. Now, why 2.2? Because it future-proofs your work. We are already talking about VCAC 3.0 draft coming out. People are talking about what's new in that, how big the change is as compared to VCAC 2.2. 2.2 is offering better cognitive and motor disabilities support as well. And again, it is backward compatible as that of 2.1.
Correct.
Now, to address your question, what organization must do differently? It actually depends upon their maturity level. Are they just getting started, or they have an established programs already in place? But I believe the next 5 universal rules that I'm going to talk through are applicable to both these setups if you're getting started or you have an established organizations. You spoke about different laws. I will always begin with evaluating your exposure. Are you selling products in Europe or your services in Europe, or they are only based in US? Based on that, you have to take a call. Are you going to comply with VCAC 2.1 AA as per ADA, or are you going to comply with EAA for European markets? So that's your starting point. Once you have identified your scope, then you have to perform a full audit to understand what are the risks linked with your product or services. Unless you fully test it, Karthik, you will not be aware of what all the challenges faced by people with disabilities.
Exactly.
What all are the blockers that are out there in your product? So the next step would be having a full audit performed. And then you come back and see what are the different policies you already have in place. If they are not there, set up those policies. Provide standardization of tools. What are the governance processes that you will have? If a product time is going live in the next iteration, what checks have you made in place? That's where you also embed at number 4. It would be embedding your processes or accessibility into the SDLC. We touched briefly about it, right? It starts with planning. Unless your product owner is not aligned with the outcomes of the release, you will not have the right budget, time, and resources to work for it. So
Correct.
embed accessibility into SDLC. And lastly, Karthik, would be track your maturity level. I have seen organizations, even after getting aware of the need for accessibility, even after fixing accessibility for quite some time, they have not matured in their accessibility programs. They are still following the ad hoc routine of somebody informing them, hey, something is wrong with your website. They are going back and then making the fix. That will continue to happen unless you have processes defined in place and you have a very solid maturity model. So there is something called as digital accessibility maturity model, and it's on a scale of 1 to 5. My advice would be to target to be at least at level 3, which is a defined level. What it means, you have right processes in place. You know, you have the RICI model, who is responsible, who is accountable. Every process is defined. You have the right guardrails before you're shipping product to the end users. And I'm proud to say every product that we ship is not just a code. It's dignity that you are providing. It's the freedom that you are providing to your end users. It's an equitable opportunity, Karthik, that you are providing to people that can help them succeed in whatever endeavor that they have. Our responsibility should be provide those capabilities, bridge the gap, the digital divide that we have.
Understood. Understood. Again, there's a lot to unpack here, but what I think is the core tenet of what you mentioned is figure out where your liabilities are. What regions do organizations operate in? What guidelines affect them? Which ones are not relevant to them? If an organization has more of a global exposure, they may be exposed to both the EAA as well as the ADA, but the underlying guidelines for them also differ. So the safest bet, according to our conversation so far, seems is to adhere to 2.2, which is also the latest guideline, and it's the safest bet for organizations to adhere to. Uh, Again, not an easy thing to accomplish in our experience that also that we've seen, but
Mhm.
definitely a work in progress that can be worked towards. And I think what you also talked about is once that liability is figured out, then an audit can be conducted, then that exposure can be gauged, and then they can be strategic about their input as to things that they prioritize versus things
Yeah.
that they can focus on later. But one thing that I is definitely my takeaway from what you said is not to have a reactive approach where something
Yes.
happens and you get a customer feedback or something happens in the market and then you get to know about it and then you make that change by that time. And I think you framed it quite beautifully, so I won't reframe it, but you're essentially, in your own words, you're extending that dignity to someone who has access needs, someone who is also slightly older maybe, because the success criteria also help people who are have age related disabilities as well. And again, we are all going to reach to that stage, God willing, at some point in time. So to give them and to extend that dignity to them and making sure that the product actually works and it's integrated right from the planning stage, I think that's a great takeaway for our audience members and listeners to have, Param. And what I would also like to unpack with you is, a lot of the times many teams focus only on web accessibility, and like you mentioned, that reactive approach, things go into post production, then that sort of comes in. Uh,
Mhm.
could you talk to us about, like, why should companies look beyond web testing and think about mobile apps, code, or design decisions, factor in both native and hybrid components, and what kind of gaps do you think exist in the market, or maybe mindset gaps that organization limit themselves to when it comes to this and only focus on just web?
Mhm. Sure, sure. I believe testing for mobile is now more critical than ever.
Yeah.
Most of our consumers, Karthik, live on mobiles, right? You can upload checks from your cell phone. You can trade stocks from your cell phone. You can do online shopping from your cell phone. So there's nothing that you can't do from your cell phones. And I have some interesting facts for our audience here. I just Googled it yesterday. The global smartphone users are 6.3 billion in 2025. That's 78% of the world population. And you will be surprised, the average time that they spend on their cell phones is 5 hours per user. And more interesting, or the shocking number that I'm going to share, is the global downloads for this year are projected to be 255 billion apps only this year, not the entire till date I'm talking about, just this year. Now, imagine ignoring your mobile users, right? To me, that's a lost opportunity, both in terms of your business, right? Tapping the unmapped territory, like in terms of revenue. We spoke about executive sponsorships, right? It's also about the impact. You are forcing your end users to go online using their laptops, using the web applications, rather than giving them the freedom to choose their device for the same activity. Now, one of the biggest misconception that I have seen and experienced is, Param, we have tested it with JAWS or NVDA on web applications. Our understanding is it will work on mobile as well. And that's completely wrong. Your mobile devices, they operate differently as compared to web applications. For example, your voiceover on Mac will not translate directly for voiceover on iPhones. They are built using completely different accessibility APIs. And even Apple says that. If you go and check their documentation, they have implemented using different APIs. And this suggests to test it separately. And you might be also aware of the ARIA support as well.
Yeah.
ARIA might work well for your web applications, but might break for it. Now, in the recent past, I want to give you or share example with this audience. We were testing for unordered list, and it was working perfectly with VoiceOver on Mac. It was identifying it as a list. But when I tested tested it on the real device, the iPhone, it was not getting recognized as a list. The reason being,
Okay.
we were using a CSS to hide the disk styling. The circle that we display for unordered list, we
Yeah,
were
yeah,
using list style none to hide it and add custom CSS on top of it. So your voiceover on Mac was honoring the HTML, because at the end of the day, it's the HTML that your assistive technologies read, right? But
correct.
voiceover on your iPhone was honoring the CSS, not your HTML. So
Mm.
that's where it's more critical to test for mobile applications as well. Because you never know, unless you test for mobile applications, how would you know, Karthik, if something is broken only specific to your mobile devices? Now
Exactly.
that
Yeah,
varies. The interesting angle to add to that, Karthik, is it varies if you're only sticking to your iPhone testing versus Android. Because things work on Android but breaks on iPhone.
yeah,
So it's more than
yeah,
critical to test on mobile applications as well.
absolutely. I mean, that that is actually that example is a real world consequence of,
Yeah.
best efforts put together, yet, you know, having that gap that still needs to be bridged. It's also a potential, lawsuit waiting to happen. You never know how that might go down. So
Right.
there's a definite, legitimate use case for mobile testing. And I think, like you mentioned, 78% of the world population is essentially on mobile devices. So there's a significant dollar value attached to it, and an
Yes.
opportunity that's being missed out from a business standpoint as well.
Mhm.
So I think with with that with that answer, Param, you've quite well established that okay, there is a difference between web testing versus mobile testing. Screen readers also behave differently. What I'd like to know next from you, Param, and again, I'm sure this is a question on a lot of people's mind, is what are some of the common pitfalls that you've seen when teams try to scale, from web-only accessibility efforts to include mobile apps? I know we spoke about one example that you gave, but what else comes to mind? Like
Mhm.
screen reader testing on real devices, automation, etc. How can our listeners, our audience, how can they avoid or mitigate some of these aspects?
Mhm. Mhm. Yep, definitely. That's one of the challenges that we also faced, Karthik, while we were scaling from web to mobile accessibility. And the biggest challenge was not having the right skill set to test for mobile specific accessibility.
Hmm.
Now, the assumption, as I spoke about earlier, is if I'm using JAWS or NVDA or VoiceOver on Mac, there are keyboard combinations that you can use, right? You can jump from one heading to another, pressing H keyboard key, one link to another versus any landmark on the page. But screen readers for your mobile devices work differently, and you need a specialized skill to test for it. For
Yeah,
example, there is something called as rotor settings on your iPhones.
correct.
I have seen testers who simply swipe left or right to go forward and backwards on the form page, right? They are unaware that you can use rotor settings to change and jump from one component to another. Similar to your web, you can use these rotor settings with the spin of two fingers on the on your app on your phone. Set
Yes.
it to your headings. You can jump from one heading to another by swiping up or down. Similarly, you can jump from one form control element to another, switching to form control first with rotor settings and then using up or down keys. So that level of knowledge, I believe, is missing.
Mm.
Also, they do not test with external devices. We only assume that a person using a cell phone will be using their hands to use the gestures. But I have seen
Exactly.
users who connect their external keyboard devices or switch devices,
Switch devices.
right?
Yeah.
So we have to test for those scenarios as well. Turning on your text-to-speech softwares is also something which is missing when we are testing with the real devices. So that's one of
Yes.
the biggest challenge, Karthik. And as I spoke earlier, right, having a mandatory role-based trainings will help resolve this issue. Like help your testing team members upskill. Okay, if you're testing for web accessibility, these are the learning paths for you. When you are transitioning to mobile testing, this is what needs to be tested for. That's one of the biggest challenge or pitfall, I would say. The other one would be over reliance on simulators. I cannot stretch more on this, but I have seen simulators. The gestures are not working. If you're trying to do swipe left or swipe right, they break in between, or there is lag, which gives an impression that it is not working. Also, again, quoting accessibility from Apple side, they say accessibility inspector are not good enough to cover the end user experience, right? They can be the starting point, but at the end, you have to test with real users on real devices. That's the second challenge, I would say. The third one is over reliance again on automation testing. I agree. Automation provides scalability, but it does not provide the end-to-end experience, right? It can miss a lot of user experience nuance, like how a user is interacting with a complex component or a widget. Was there any distraction in the middle? So I believe those are the three things which, in my experience, are common pitfalls when your team is scaling from web into mobile.
Got it. Got it. So, number one, there's obviously a knowledge gap and a training
Yes.
gap that needs to be bridged when it comes to experience testing of screen readers, specifically on mobile devices like VoiceOver or TalkBack. And then there's obviously over reliance, like you mentioned, on simulators or emulators. They are not the right approach to making sure that you factor in not just accessibility but also usability. And then,
Yes.
like you mentioned, there's also over reliance on automation. So you have to keep the experience that someone with access needs who is trying this out and the kind of frustration they will have, once they interact with your product. And so, Param, based on our discussion so far, I think it's been quite insightful. You've given examples, you've talked about your experience, things that you've led. You're obviously an expert and you've been doing screen reader testing for years. So I understand it's one of the most tedious things to do. And it's one of the things that, it's not advisable to be automated, like you mentioned right now. Can you share how you've done it historically while handling like device fragmentation? I know we touched briefly about simulators, emulators, and how the importance of manual testing. But how do you see that changing in the age of AI and automation?
Well, you're taking me back in time, Karthik. So I first used a screen reader JAWS back in 2017. And I
Okay.
believe at that time it was JAWS version 2018, but I have to look online for that. In full honesty, I I got annoyed listening to that screen reader because when you have never listened to a screen reader and you start listening to that robotic voice when you are just
Yeah.
getting started,
Yeah.
it's annoying at times. So what I did back in the day, Karthik, I gamified it. So every
Okay.
three weeks, I used to change the voice profile of it so that
Nice.
it's not sitting in my subconscious
Yeah. Yeah.
mind. I
Yeah.
used to do that. So, but as I digged deeper, as I moved deeper into web accessibility, Karthik, I I saw the impact of my work. I went through a lot of training sessions, and in those training sessions, I saw a lot of videos how these screen readers are changing the lives of so many people. And that's where we spoke about at the beginning of the session, right? Having that empathy. At the beginning of my career into web accessibility, I believe empathy was missing. as I learned more, I developed empathy, and accessibility became my second nature. So
Mm.
that's how my transitioning from getting annoyed to embracing accessibility and screen readers happened. And it took a while. It's not that it took me a year or so. It took me at least 2, 3 years to come to that. Right.
Okay.
Now, to answer your question, like what kind of devices I used to use, any simulators, Google Analytics or other analytics that you might be using is your best friend. That gives you the insight what your end users are actually using. Do you have more users who are using iPhone versus Android? Or if you're testing for web applications, do you have users more on Mac machines versus any Windows machine? So we used that back in the day, and we do that today as well, Karthik, to understand which portion is having the majority of our users. Having said that, we always target to test for one device at least on Android, one on iOS, one on Mac, and one on Windows, giving us enough coverage. As we spoke about, testing on web accessibility alone will not ensure accessibility for mobile devices.
Correct.
Same is true for testing on Windows versus testing on Mac machines. So in order to cover, you have to test for all four different combinations, right? That can be driven with your Google Analytics. So the Google Analytics is your best friend in this case. Simulators, in my experience, are unreliable. They do often miss screen reader capabilities. Even if they have full capabilities on occasions, the lag that you have, because for you and me to access that simulator, we are going through network. And
Correct.
most of the times we are using remote devices, but we use AWS, Amazon Workspaces. So you're connecting your machine to an AWS. From AWS, you're connecting to a simulator. There is a possibility of lag happening, not purely because of simulator, it could be because of AWS or any other remote device that you use. So in my experience, simulators are unreliable. Now, talking about the world or the era that we are living in, AI, it's changing every single day. I was watching the AI 2025 session that happened yesterday.
Yes.
Sora, if you might have seen, it's revolutionizing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm optimistic about AI changing the world for accessibility. I'm keen on seeing how we can automate screen reader testing, right? How we can automate the human interaction, how well we can see a screen reader announcement using automation and matching the natural way we talk with each other, how close we can get. That's what I believe I'm more optimistic about and excited about all these AI transitions happening in today's world.
Absolutely. I think you know, two major takeaways from what you said, at least for me, is emulators like are not reliable. You're actually doing some level of disservice to the end client if you're
Mhm.
not making sure that your experiences are seamless. And second, like you mentioned, even I echo that same sentiment. I'm quite excited to see how AI and automation can transform screen reader testing, how that voice will be changing. But what I particularly liked about you sharing that, small excerpt from your previous experiences is how you gamified that approach. So that is a good takeaway for me as well, since I interact with screen readers almost on a daily basis as a part of my work. So I'm going to definitely try that out, and it's quite interesting to hear that story from you, Param. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that also brings me to the next question that, I'm just thinking out loud here, thinking of the limitations. What benefits arise from testing screen readers on real devices versus simulators, or the importance of testing screen readers on real devices is now to some extent widely accepted. Like it, do you think, as you know, as an expert in accessibility, as someone who's spent more than a decade doing it, has worn multiple hats, would you agree with that statement? Do you still see folks in the accessibility community understanding or the importance of testing on screen readers? What has your experience been when it comes to focusing on real devices, especially on screen readers?
Well, Karthik, in a perfect world with unlimited budget, unlimited time, and unlimited testing members, I will
Yeah,
go for a real device testing any day. But you and I know, and all our participants know, that's not feasible, right? You have limited budget, you have limited time because you are going live every second or third week. And for larger organization, they are going live every 3 to 4th day, right? So there is not much time to test for all the devices possible. And that's where we can make use of remote devices. I believe BrowserStack has that suite where we can use screen reader testing, right? That's something that we can make use of. But the real challenge, as we spoke about simulators, Karthik, is not having the true swipe, I would say, experience, uh,
yeah,
the lag that we talked about, and the limited support for screen readers. Some simulators don't even provide screen reader experiences. They are only there to test functionality, right? So, in my opinion, testing on a real device is the highest priority. But given the budget constraints and other constraints that we spoke about, having access to remote real devices, not simulators, is something that we would go for. That gives flexibility to not have an iPhone or an Android for every single member on your dev team. I know
yeah.
that the team would be really happy with it, but that's not technically feasible, right? So you can
Correct,
use the
correct.
same pool of devices across your team. So that's my point on it.
Makes sense, Param. I think in an ideal world, we would all want multiple devices to
Yeah,
offer a
iPhone
seamless
latest.
experience.
Yeah, I definitely need or I want, not need, want iPhone 17 Pro Max. Why not?
Me too. Me too. I think at this point, I want to shift gears a little and move from
Hmm.
mobile accessibility to the other side of things. And I know you talked about moving things even lefter to start right from the planning phase. Uh, here's what I want to know, Param. From a design and developer handoff perspective, what practices ensure that mobile apps are accessible from the start? How do design systems, component libraries, or custom components, how can they be built in a way that it does not hurt the overall accessibility effort?
Well, interestingly, I was on a podcast with Chantel Butler. She is one of the senior user experience managers working for one of the largest exchanges in the States. And she said it very beautifully, Karthik. She said, design system is your source of truth. And I completely agree with that. For folks who are not aware what a design system is, it's a collection of components that represent two things, your brand and your accessibility. Now, if you're having a design system and you're building more than one website or a product, your designers, your and developers are completely dependent on it. That helps you with two things. It helps you with scalability and how fast you can deliver products. It is applicable for your web applications as well as for your mobile applications, Karthik. Having a solid design system in place is a blessing. Because if you are not having a reliable design system, it's like a snowball effect. Bad
Yeah,
designs, bad coding, and bad end product. So
correct.
always start with having accessibility embedded into your design system. And to quickly summarize, right, having the right accessibility annotations in your Figma files as part of your design system is a must. Your job as a designer is to remove or reduce ambiguity so that your developer have clarity while they are building their code and they are not bugging you time and again. Hey, Karthik, what should be H1 on this? What should be button versus link on this? Right?
Yeah,
That's where having accessibility annotations are the key. have design handoff calls. Don't assume that your developer will understand your designs. Provide them a walkthrough, help them walk through the different frames that you have created. What is the right flow? And again, like you audit your any other product, get your design system also audited so that you understand the gaps and fix it moving forward. I will end this question or my answer with this, Karthik. I truly believe designers are the true enablers of accessibility. As I said earlier, bad design leads to bad product. So if design is good, everything should fall in place.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Like your design system is your source of truth. And once you get the foundation right and the handoff process is done, all the annotations and the correct information is there, you've communicated it in a handoff meeting also, then you set the right foundation for
Yes.
success and for also keeping accessibility in mind. And then there's that trickle down effect that you also spoke about. So, absolutely. So, I think moving on to the next question that I have, Param, I think developers are often responsible for fixing issues. And so my next question is tailored more on that. So what changes in terms of tools, maybe handset habits or mindsets have you made or you wish you could have made so that when developers write code, they automatically think of accessibility instead of retrofitting it later?
Mhm. But I would say don't make the mistakes that I did, right? I took compliance and lawsuits as my motivation to begin with when I was a developer in my previous life, I would say. In terms of mindset shift, Karthik, I would say start with creating awareness. Help your designers understand the real why behind the work that they are doing. It should be more of a pull, not a push. Like it should be more coming from within rather than something that you're putting on top of what they already have to deliver. Front-end developers have a lot of things in their plate. They have to deliver functionality, right, which is working from end-to-end flows. If you add
Correct.
accessibility on top of it, that's an additional thing that they have to do. They will only
Exactly.
do it if you provide ample time. And that's where going back to our discussion of planning it in the right way. Are you providing it right time for your developer to build for it or not? Right? Having role-based trainings, upskilling them, having giving them the right knowledge, and standardizing your tools, Karthik, is critical. It shouldn't be your developer is using tool A and your tester is using tool B. Your results will never match. So both your members should be using same tools to compare apples to apples, right? That's what I would suggest. What we have done here at Guardian, Karthik, we have something called as Consumer Advocacy Champions Program, wherein we help them upskill not only from accessibility standpoint, but also from the user experience standpoint. Like, okay, VCAG or accessibility is important, but is it also shaping the user experience for regular users as well? That's where we have seen a lot of change happening. Developers are more aware what is right versus wrong. Now, in technical terms, when it comes to tools and habits, starting with writing your accessibility requirements into the user stories. Your developers should not be Googling online how to make a page web accessible, right?
Yeah.
Those requirements should be part of your user stories. Your definition of done should clearly satisfy or state that you cannot close a story unless it's fully compliant. And what does compliancy mean? Are you using the right linters? Like, can you find accessibility issues while you're writing the code? What plugins are you using? And what manual checks you have done before pushing it to ready for QA? So those are the things I would say, Karthik, helped our developers, and I would suggest participants who are developers on the call to use it.
It makes sense, Param. And like I really appreciate you sharing that. So to me, it sounds like obviously you start from right from the planning phase, but even the developers have to be clear on their why they're doing it, and maybe not make that same mistake of looking at it from a compliance lens,
Correct.
and have that empathy lens and making sure that they are having these mindsets in place. And having the right sort of standardized toolings, and when necessary, they can also take that initiative and get clarity from the designers also, and make sure that the QAs and the developers have like a standardized tooling in place so that things aren't lost in translation as they move through across the SDLC. So
Yes.
I think it has been a great discussion so far, Param. I'm really enjoying our conversation, and I want to thank you for taking out the time. Your approach is obviously methodical, but it's also empathetic. And a lot of the times, what we see in also, in our interactions with our clients, especially enterprise clients, is that they underestimate the time and effort it might take to get there when it comes to accessibility, and they end up overestimating their existing abilities. So it is sort of a seesaw balance that they have to do. But I think with the information that you've shared, our audience members can go back with at least some more insights as to how they can approach this and define a clear why, and maybe start earlier. And before we end the fireside chat, just one last question from my side, Param, is one piece of advice that you would like to give to everyone. And I've deliberately kept this question more open ended and not design specific or developer specific. It could be anything, but we'd love to hear your thoughts as someone who's a veteran in the industry.
Well, if someone is looking to grow into the accessibility field, having knowledge about accessibility success criteria or laws is not good enough. You have to build connections. You have to understand how people with disabilities really use those assistive technologies. My recommendation would be, Karthik, to join those clubs, understand and experience how they are using assistive technologies. Ask questions what's working well for them and what improvement they would like to have, right? And there are forums, right? Disability in is one of the greatest conferences that we have on a yearly basis.
Yeah,
I would advise if you are in states, come attend those sessions in person. Those are eye-opening. You get to meet with industry leaders as well, understand their perspective too, and connect with people who are living with a disability, right? That will really change the way you see the world. For me, when I started back in 2017, it was a complete change for me. I was not just building applications, I was building applications that was impacting lives. So if you want to grow in the space, join Disability in Enabling Summit that is happening right now. I believe it was the third or second day today. So join
yeah.
those.
Understood. Understood. Be more, close knit with the community and make sure
Yeah.
that you actually see usability in action and hear from leaders. I think there's also a Indian Disability Conference happening in November in Bangalore. Uh, so yes, there are quite multiple forums out there, and I really want to thank you, Param, for sharing those insights with us, not just from my side, but from the entire BrowserStack team. A heartfelt thank you for taking time out, and I think we can move to the next section of today's webinar. I'd like to quickly give you a 60-second overview of what the BrowserStack accessibility testing suite looks like and what we have to offer. BrowserStack has been in the market for the last 15 years, and as most of our clients know, we are a real device lab. You get access to real devices, both on web and app. But not just that, we can support accessibility testing at every stage of the SDLC, right from design to dev to QA. And you get that standardization across all because the underlying rule engine, something that we've developed in-house, and it's proprietary to BrowserStack, called the Spectra rule engine, that we've developed in-house, powers each step of the SDLC. So we have a design stage that can help you scan both web and mobile apps and their frames within Figma, help create annotations. We provide linters and MCP servers for developers. On the QA side, you get both manual as well as fully automated abilities to check for web as well as mobile apps. And you get access to screen readers on real devices. So your NVDAs, VoiceOver for Mac, VoiceOver for iPhones, TalkBack, even JAWS, all of these are available on the BrowserStack platform for you guys to test on. And it's all a part of a singular monitoring dashboard where you get how to fix remediation guidance, AI level code fixes, and if needed, BrowserStack can also accommodate accessibility audits and end user usability testing by people who have access needs. Perfect. So I think time for some Q&A questions. I think we're a little tight on time, Param, and I know we have almost extended over 1 minute, but I think we have an interesting point from Steve McCarvey, who's mentioned that it who's not exactly a question, but shared some observations with us that accessibility is usability. Uh, I,
Mhm.
I wouldn't want to take up the entire question, Param, but would love to hear your thoughts on that and any feedback on that.
Well, I completely agree with that feedback or the observation that Steve has. Yes. In terms of shifting left, Steve, you always start with your planning phase. And planning phase is when you are defining your epics, right? And then you define your features, then you drill down to your user stories. So before they impact your designers, you have that planning in place, giving you ample resources that needs to be aligned to deliver a product that is inclusive from day one. So I'm completely aligned with your observations.
Thank you for echoing that sentiment, Param, and adding a little bit of nuance there as well. Perfect. I think that's all the time that we have. Param, again, a heartfelt thank you from myself and the entire BrowserStack team. This has been a great discussion. I am sure enlightened, and I've learned a lot of things from an expert like you, as I'm sure our listeners and audience members have too. But a heartfelt thank you from me and the entire BrowserStack team, and thank you so much for taking time and joining us for today's fireside chat.
Absolutely. Pleasure is mine, Karthik. Thank you for having me.